Oh, John.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Now, what part do you have in this fabulous Sinatra festival that Tony is putting on?
Well, for several years I've been part of the festival. I usually do one night, sometimes as a soloist, sometimes a duo with bass player, and a couple of sets of Sinatra music, arrangements I put together, and so forth.
But you know more about Frank Sinatra than most people, don't you?
I do. My father was his in-studio record producer from 1953 to 1958, and they did 10 albums together. So I have a lot of anecdotes, a lot of stories, a lot of inside Frank stuff that Dad told me about over the years.
And you're going to tell some of these stories? Yes.
I am.
Yes,
It weaves right in with the tunes.
What was your dad's favorite Sinatra album?
I think probably Songs for Swingin' Lovers. I just think he thought it was Frank's probably greatest achievement to date. It was a concept record, which all of the records were that they did. They picked a theme, in that case tunes that swung, and chose material that went along with that theme and did the record. 14 tunes, 7 tunes aside, and all Nelson Riddle arrangements. And I would say it's probably Dad's favorite.
Any interesting stories that go around that album?
My favorite is, at the time in L.A., Dick Whittinghill was the biggest disc jockey, and this was in '57. And Dad said the record had just come out, and he was on his way home from work, and Whittinghill said, "The new Sinatra album is out. I may get fired for this, but I'm going to play all 14 tunes in a row, no commercial." So Dad said he pulled over to the side of the road and just listened to the whole album, tune after tune after tune. And unheard of. This was AM radio, in the 50s. And of course he could do it. He could get away with it because of who he was. But that's how big a splash that record made. It was just a huge success.
There's so many, people have so many different ideas about what Sinatra was like.
Right.
What was Sinatra like?
Well, it depended on the day of the week.
Yes, like most of us.
Yeah. It swung pretty hard one way or the other. Dad said you weren't quite sure which Frank you would get. And that's kind of what made it work. Dad was a very laid-back, quiet, dry kind of guy. Frank, the opposite. So Dad could roll with the punches. Whatever Frank threw his way, he sort of was able to roll with and adapt to. But, as difficult as he might have been sometimes, the music was so great and he sang so well. And it made it all worth it. But it was definitely a lot of diplomacy working with Frank.
Well, what kinds of things could Frank Sinatra throw your dad's way?
Just deciding he didn't want to do certain tunes, deciding he'd rather have a different arranger on something than had already been planned, just being in a bad mood, telling the musicians they weren't doing very well that night. And the one group he wouldn't give a hard time to were the violin players, because most of them were older European, mostly men, played in the LA Phil, and they didn't take it from anybody, including Sinatra. So Dad said he would leave all the fiddle players alone, but the brass players he used to lay into once in a while if he didn't like the way it sounded, or he thought it was too loose, or things like that. So just extremely outspoken. So
in those days, was your dad's title producer?
Yeah, he was a staff producer. In those days, Capitol only had several producers. They had one guy that did country, basically, one guy that, one or two that did jazz, and a couple that did pop. And that was it. It was all in-house. And they were just, you basically were assigned someone. Dad would get a call, Frank's going to do a record, or he did 2 albums with Judy Garland. He did Dinah Shore, 4 Freshmen, the 4 Preps, a whole lot of acts. He was just one of the guys that got those assignments. Different from today, considerably.
So that was before multi-tracking, right?
It was. Frank's first records were 3-track mono. And before the famous Capitol Tower was built, they recorded in a theater on Melrose Avenue in Hollywood. Orchestra would be on stage, just a couple of mics hanging. Frank in the center aisle, 1 mic on him. That was it. Hardly any splicing either. Occasionally tape was spliced. No overdubs, nothing like that. So those records were performances that were captured on tape. They were really like live bits that were captured.
And your dad had to make sure everything was there and ready when Frank walked in, is that right?
That's right. All the guys had to be contracted, all the players. Yeah, everything had to. He was the in-studio coordinator. In those days, more like a director of a film might be, coordinating with the arranger, material, musicians, studio itself, engineer, all that stuff. So Dad had to coordinate all those aspects to all those records.
He had to love that.
He did.
Yeah.
He, Dad had been a drummer for years in San Francisco before working at Capitol, and so he came from a musical background, and he liked the coordination of all the different parts of the project.
Do you have a favorite Sinatra tune?
Ah, gee, several.
Top 5?
Oh, love Old Devil Moon from Songs for Swingin' Lovers. Guess I'll Hang My Tears Out to Dry is one of my favorite Sinatra tunes. That was on the last album Dad did, which was Only the Lonely, 1958. Gee, those two stick out. Mostly stuff that swings. And before he was at Capitol, he hadn't done as much of that. He was more of a crooner, ballad singer.
Yeah.
And once he was with Nelson Riddle and Dad and some other people that influenced him to swing harder and do that, that's what he started to do. So that's my favorite stuff.
So what will you start out with? Do you know what you'll start out with here?
Different times. It's all stuff Dad did with Frank.
Yeah.
So the last couple of times I've started out with I Get a Kick Out of You, Cole Porter. Old Devil Moon, maybe. Something up.
For instance.
My story is much too sad to be told, for practically everything leaves me totally cold. The only exception I know is the case when I'm out on a quiet spree, fighting vainly the old ennui. Then I suddenly turn and see your fabulous face. I get no kick from champagne, mere alcohol, it doesn't thrill me at all. So tell me, why is it true that I get a kick out of you? Like that.